Alright, well, Rogue Temple's Fortnite has come and gone, and it's currently around, the start of November when I'm basically posting this video. Since that time, I've basically gone to, do, a review for, basically all the games that are basically in this, jam. Bar one, and that's basically Sobek's Tomb here. And the reason I didn't basically do a video for this one is because I can't download 1.8 gigabytes without the file failing, unfortunately, from X5IO. So, tough luck, but, Sobek's Tomb doesn't get a video from me because I can't seem to download this file. And I might attempt, after this video, but I haven't been able to download it, I've made multiple attempts. I just can't download it, so there's that. Anyhow, I'll look basically for a definition of, Rogue Temple's Fortnite. The goal of this is basically to create a traditional relic in 2 weeks. And they basically, Slash basically put in his, little definition here: turn-based, run-based, permanent consequences, procedural content duration, and built around a single character or a small party of characters. For the most part, this was, a fairly good, concise little definition. But I think there's still, a lot of, wiggle room that basically leaves, players basically, insert, entries that, were puzzle-based or just not really basically, traditional relics. And I figure, we just cover some of the games, basically, some thoughts basically about them. So, first things first, I will note that basically for, this jam, I used the 1 to 5 point scale. And for the most part, when, looking at the, games I basically judged here, I basically, had scores between, 1 and 4. There was technically, one game that basically I gave a 5 to in, one of those categories that's basically down here with, the Gates of the Deaths. I had, amazing scope, so I gave him a 5 for it, because it went beyond what I basically expected from Senderel. But for the most part, no one was really getting basically beyond 4s basically for a lot of their content here, so they got less scores as a result of that for the most part. But one guy got 5, so congrats to him, he got 5 from me. Anyhow, I'll note basically over here in this row over here, I see Rolex basically yes and no. Note that basically for a lot of these Rolex basically here, if I basically do a quick A to Z here, a lot of the games that basically were submitted to the jam, I felt they weren't traditional relics. And a common occurrence basically for a lot of them, Jerder's Die here, for example, Scallywag Explore, the Minolean Labyrinth, and Snake, I could probably throw Snake's Descent in here. Sematron could be thrown in here as well. That felt traditional enough, but the thing is, a lot of these games that basically the developers basically throwing in here, they were very puzzle based, and as a result of that, I felt a lot of them are basically getting at least by me not considered to be traditional relics as a result. And I think there needs to be more done to sort of emphasize that there needs to be some sort of immersion with the character. So it doesn't really feel say a tactile thing where you basically start moving a piece on the board you're actually the player. That wasn't basically felt in some of these games for me. And as a result at least 5 of these basically got to marked off as no, not traditional relics. And by all means they are relics, but they just aren't traditional is the thing. Some other ones that basically didn't get the traditional relic modifiers, the ogre basically I had no pursuit duration, so it just didn't fit the bill for it. This one right here, it could have possibly been a pursuit duration, but all these games it's fairly understandable. This didn't fit it because they didn't fit the rules that were already there. Kind of with the force here, that could be the same thing as well. A lot of them as well were just incomplete, so that's the thing too. But it was basically to say the biggest issue basically a lot of these games has the fact that they weren't very immersive, and you can't really draw the player basically in, and that's really all we can really say about it. All right, so this is sort of go through the review games right here. I'll note that basically for the scores here, if I basically sort these right here, let's just go Z to A. If you're looking for some top scoring relics basically for my mindset, Jungle Rot's pretty good. You can sort of ignore Pocket Dimensional RL because it's basically not Power's jam, but it was basically done around the time of the Fortnite, so it could be considered to be part of it in a way. It's just it's not done the proper thing. So I marked it as 1, but it's not. Die with Dare, I gave it a 3.6. Reclaimer, Minolean Labyrinth, Gates of Deaths, Rouge. And it's worth knowing by the way as well. Just looking at these things here, Reclaimer
Gates of Death, Minoan Labyrinth, Die. That's 4 games right there that I could like say like, you know, they didn't really feel like they were like, you know, traditional roguelikes. They're very like puzzly. Not really Gates of Death. Gates of Death is basically just like a you know, a word like crawler, but a lot of the top games here were like, you know, puzzle roguelikes is really out there. So it might be just something that's to know, like, you know, to like, you know, slashy, just make them like, you know, some sort of like rule based about like immersion. I'll know basically one of the like, you know, people who basically, you know, took part here, if I can always find Xeno Rogue. He made Chicken XX5, and his game was like, you know, sort of like, you know, how can I say, like a reaction basically to like the rule set and stuff. So we're just gonna go here. He has like a rant, and basically like, you know, this is not really like, but more prestige of the rules of Rogue Tables Fortnite, because he was basically like saying like, you know, we should basically like, you know, not try and define it and stuff like that. Now, no, but he knows this isn't roguelike, and I didn't consider it roguelike, but also for like more reasons than he basically like stated. But the thing is, like, you know, I think he basically like had like, you know, some good thoughts here basically about like, you know, pros and such, and you know, there's just a lot basically of like, you know, thoughts basically I had in order to like, you know, try and like get this right for next year, because I do think like, you know, it wasn't bad like, you know, Jam. There was basically roguelikes basically galore for this one, but you know, more work needs to be done, I think, to sort of like flesh out the rules here a little bit. Now, I will note, by the way, like, you know, down here, if I go to scoring again, and I guess we just, you know, sort this again to like, you know, A to Z, there were basically some games that like, you know, I scored very lowly, and all these games here, for the most part, they have low def or like, you know, they're basically incomplete games. Something that I think needs to be done for like, you know, the next like, you know, Fortnite as well. There needs to be like, you know, much like the Sunday Rails, would you consider this complete or incomplete as an entry, like, you know, option for your game? Because you have like turn-based in like real time, it's like, you know, that, you know, you don't really need that. Basically, if it's real time, it's basically not traditional roguelike. But if it's basically like, you know, incomplete, that's definitely what deserves to be marked, because a lot of these games basically were incomplete, and they're basically like, you know, games that basically like, you know, if you look at over here, and I go to like, you know, this thing again, a lot of it's like no's basically gave were games like, you know, that were like, you know, very low. So Hail on Dreams, this is like a no because it didn't have enough depth. Some of the other no's basically I had here. Russian Ruined, too incomplete, so you can't call it anything that's basically incomplete. Vamping, incomplete game, that can't really define anything. Like, if they're incomplete, they shouldn't be like, you know, being scored. And even though this wasn't a scoring like type of thing, I think it's better to like, you know, try and like, you know, push them aside so like, you know, people can basically avoid them, like, you know, not really worry about them. Pretty important, I think. Undo. All right, for the most part, if I get a chance, I'll basically go back to try and do subbucks like 2 and stuff like that. But for the most part, I'm basically done with like this year. I thought it was a fair, like, you know, a lot of the interests are pretty good, by the way, for the most part. I mean, some of them basically felt like they like, you know, missed the mark with like being puzzle roguelikes, and like other ones were basically like, you know, not like, you know, just roguelikes to begin with. But for the most part, I feel like a lot of developers did a really good job, like, you know, committing to like, you know, making games that like, you know, can be played like, you know, fairly quickly. I guess I would place to throw out a favorite, maybe Jungle Rot, just to throw out there for like, you know, a game based to play. But other than that, done for now. I'll see you guys in the Sunday Rails for like, you know, 2026, and take care.